In the autumn of 1831, when the leaves of New Hampshire blazed with fire before surrendering to death, the townspeople whispered of a woman whose wealth could not be measured in coin. The widow Maren Hale lived in a crumbling farmhouse at the edge of the forest, her curtains always drawn, her lantern burning even in the hours before dawn. Farmers passing her land said they heard the slow drip of liquid into metal pans, echoing like the tolling of a bell in an empty church. But it was not rainwater, nor milk, nor oil, she gathered. It was blood. Yes, human blood. The rumor first began with a single child, pale and trembling, who swore he saw the widow in the moonlight, holding a glass jar filled with something dark and thick. The villagers dismissed it as the wild imagination of youth. Yet weeks later, when cattle were found with their throats slit and their bodies drained, the whispers hardened into fear. What did she want with such a substance? And why was it hidden beneath the floorboards of her home, sealed in bottles, lined like soldiers of death? The truth was this: gold could not buy the widow's security, nor jewels her peace of mind. What she treasured was the essence of life itself, that crimson stream that kings and beggars alike must surrender when their hour comes. She believed, or perhaps she knew, that blood was the true currency of power. So when you hear me speak of her, do not think of this as folklore. Think of it as the first step into a world where the veil between myth and history collapses, and the things you were told could not be stand waiting in the shadows. Now write in the comments which city and what time you are listening to us from, so we know who is absorbing this secret. The year 1831 was no ordinary year in America. Industry was clawing its way through the countryside, churches fought against the rise of strange philosophies, and whispers of rebellion stirred beneath the surface of society. Yet in rural New Hampshire, life still clung to old rhythms. Bells rang on Sunday mornings, children ran barefoot along dirt paths, and farmers bent their backs beneath the sun. On the surface it was peace, beneath a quiet dread. The widow had once been a respected figure. Maren Hale was the daughter of a merchant, married young to a prosperous man. But fate struck her cruelly. Her husband died mysteriously, his lips blue, his body drained of warmth in a single night. She was left alone, wrapped in black garments, speaking to no one, her eyes staring too long at the veins of those around her. The town pitied her, at first. But pity curdled into suspicion when livestock began disappearing, when dogs barked endlessly at her door, when midnight travelers swore they saw lantern light flickering through her windows long after every other home was dark. And the sound, always that sound, the drip, 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 like water leaking from the throat of a dying man. In those days, science had no place for such whispers. Doctors explained it away as hysteria, ministers as temptation. Yet the villagers knew what they felt in their bones. Something unnatural was living among them. Something ancient wrapped in the skin of a grieving woman. And you, listener, should understand this. Societies often bury what they cannot explain. They label it madness, myth, or superstition. But the truth always survives, just out of sight, waiting for someone bold enough to confront it. Tonight, that someone is you. And if you feel ready to take the next step and become part of this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Maren Hale's past was not without shadows, even before the whispers of blood. As a girl, she had been known to wander the graveyard, touching the stones with a strange reverence, whispering names as if she were Satan, howling the dead to answer her. Her mother once found her asleep in the barn with a dead crow, cradled in her arms, its wings stiff, its eyes glazed like black mirrors. "She has always been too close to death," her father muttered, though he never spoke of it outside their home. When she married, she seemed to grow into normalcy for a time. She smiled at gatherings, attended church, and baked bread for the poor. But those who looked closely said her smile never reached her eyes, and her prayers were always silent. The death of her husband only deepened the strangeness. She wore mourning not for a year, but forever. A permanent veil, a permanent shroud. Neighbors began to wonder, Did she kill him? Was he her first sacrifice? Some claimed that on the night of his passing they saw her digging behind the house. Others said his coffin was too light when carried to the churchyard. None dared question her openly. She had a way of fixing her gaze upon a person that left them speechless, their throat tightening as though invisible fingers pressed against it. Children were warned never to approach her property. "The widow collects what is not hers," parents said in hushed tones. Yet children are curious, and one boy who dared to peer through her window swore he saw bottles, rows of bottles, stacked upon shelves, filled with a thick, dark fluid. He swore he saw her sipping from one as though it were wine. Perhaps the most disturbing rumor was this: Maren never seemed to age. A decade passed, and though others grew grey and weary, her skin remained pale and smooth, her figure unbent, her eyes sharp as knives, blood instead of gold. Some called it obsession, others sorcery. But those who had read the forbidden texts said something more: that she was practicing an ancient rite, a ritual older than the churches, older even than the nation itself. She was hoarding not wealth, but years. The mystery began to unravel not in her home, but in the fields surrounding it. Animals turned up mutilated, their corpses drained, tongues swollen, eyes wide in frozen terror. Horses collapsed in their stalls with no wound except 2 faint marks near the neck. Chickens were found hanging from rafters, their bodies emptied like sacks of grain. The villagers whispered of wolves, though no tracks were found. Others muttered about vagrants, though no man could drink blood without leaving a mess. What they found near the creek silenced all arguments. A woman's dress, soaked in red, laid neatly upon the rocks as though someone had removed it for washing. But there was no body, no trail, nothing. Just the faint smell of iron rising from the fabric. Soon after, a farmer claimed to see Maren walking along the same creek at dawn, barefoot, her hem dripping wet. He swore her lips were stained dark, as though she had been drinking from the current. When asked what he saw in her eyes, he said only this: hunger. The town grew restless. Men began carrying rifles even in daylight. Women clutched rosaries when her name was spoken. Yet the minister counseled patience, declaring that grief makes people do strange things, that suspicion was the devil's snare. Still, no one dared confront her. The turning point came when a group of hunters chasing a wounded stag followed its blood trail deep into the widow's land. The animal's prints stopped suddenly as though it had vanished, but in the soil nearby, they found something else. Jars, half buried, sealed with wax, their glass sides darkened by what was unmistakably blood. Dozens of them, like offerings to a god no one wished to name. They did not touch the jars. They fled, swearing never to return. But the secret spread faster than fire, until the whole town buzzed with the same unspoken thought. The widow was not mourning her husband. She was feeding on something far older, far more terrifying. And with each drop she collected, she seemed less like a woman and more like a vessel. By the winter of 1831, the town of Grafton could no longer look away. Disappearances began. Small at first, easy to dismiss. A peddler who never returned, a child who wandered too far into the snow, a farmhand whose bed was found empty at dawn. People told themselves these things happened in the harsh winters of New England. But there was always something strange about the pattern. The vanishings circled outward from Maren Hale's land like ripples from a stone cast into a pond. The sheriff tried to restore calm. He told the townsfolk that wolves were the cause, that no woman, least of all a grieving widow, could be responsible. Yet when pressed, even he admitted that wolves did not leave behind footprints that began and ended in the same patch of earth, as if the creature had risen into the air. Nor could wolves explain why some victims were never found, while others turned up weeks later, their bodies pale, their skin deflated as though emptied from within. Doctors inspected one such body, a young girl, barely 12. Their report said severe blood loss. But the minister whispered to his congregation that what they had seen was a soul taken, not merely a life. He urged prayer, fasting, and distance from the widow's land, yet still every night people swore they saw the faint glow of a lantern moving through her house as though she never slept. There were even those who said she was seen in two places at once, one sighting in the graveyard, another at her window, both at the same hour. How could that be? Some villagers began to believe she was no longer human, but something else entirely, something that used human flesh like a mask. The ground outside her home told its own story. Where most houses were marked by footsteps, wheel tracks, and farm tools, hers was marked by stains, long, dark trails frozen into the snow leading into her cellar doors. And in the nights of deepest frost, when even the wolves fell silent, the townsfolk swore they could hear her, voice carrying across the fields, singing, not hymns, not lullabies, but chants in a language none recognized, low, rhythmic, rising and falling like waves of the sea until the sound cut off with a scream. The church bells tolled louder that spring, but their iron tongues did not drown the fear. By then, the case of the widow had reached beyond whispers and become a source of open debate. Families argued whether to flee or to confront her, or to let God himself judge. But beneath the arguments lay the same unspoken terror. To challenge her was to invite her attention, and no one wanted that. Still, not all could resist curiosity. A group of young men, emboldened by drink, decided one April night to creep up to the widow's windows and spy upon her. What they saw there was never fully spoken of. One of them later confessed, shaking, that she had been standing before a table of jars, each filled to the brim with blood, the surface glimmering in the lamplight like molten rubies. She dipped her fingers into one, traced a symbol on the wall, and then raised her hand to her lips. Another swore she was speaking to someone unseen, her head bowed, her words measured. She was not alone in that room, he whispered, though we saw only her. By dawn, one of the young men fell gravely ill. His skin turned grey, his eyes sank, and he begged his friends not to let him fall asleep. When he did, he never woke again. The doctor said fever. The others said curse. From that night onward, no one dared approach her windows. The minister, shaken, sought counsel from a traveling scholar who claimed knowledge of forbidden texts. This man studied the reports and muttered that what they faced was no mere witch, but a practitioner of the doctrine of vitae, an ancient belief that blood could capture memory, time, and strength. Those who drank it could steal the vitality of the living and wear it as their own. The scholar warned that such rites were never performed alone. If Maren Hale was truly practicing them, then she was in communion with something greater, something older, something that did not die. He urged them to act quickly, to purge her house with fire before the rot spread further, but the townsfolk hesitated. Fire might destroy her body, but what if she no longer lived within it? What if what dwelled inside her simply moved on into another host? So they did nothing, and by doing nothing, they gave her time. Summer came, and with it, the harvest. But the fields near the widow's home bore strange scars. Cornstalks withered overnight, their roots blackened as though poisoned from beneath. Apple trees dropped their fruit too early, the cores rotten, the flesh spotted with dark veins. Farmers cursed the land, but deep down, they knew whose presence blighted it. The soil itself seemed to recoil from her. The children felt it most. They claimed that when they passed her lane, they could feel their hearts beating faster, their blood rushing louder in their ears. Some refused to walk by at all, insisting they heard voices whispering from the cracks in her cellar doors. One boy, brave or foolish, dared to throw a stone at her house. Days later, he vanished. His mother found his cap lying in the ditch beside her fence, stiff with a stain that had seeped through the wool. The boy's father stormed the sheriff's office demanding action, but the sheriff's men refused. They said they could not condemn a woman without proof, yet in private they admitted something darker. None of them were willing to set foot inside her home. The townsfolk debated. Was she a witch, a demon, or something worse, something for which they had no name. The scholar who had warned them returned briefly, and when he heard of the new vanishings, he simply shook his head. "You are already too late," he said. "Once she has gathered enough, she will not remain bound to her home. She will move outward. She will spread." And then came the night that sealed the town's fear into silence. A farmer's wife, hearing cries near her barn, took a lantern to investigate. She found her cow lying dead, its throat opened, its body emptied. But what chilled her was not the sight of the animal. It was the figure kneeling beside it, dipping her hands into the blood as though washing. The lantern fell. The woman screamed, and in that brief flare of firelight she swore she saw Maren Hale look up, her mouth painted red, her eyes burning not with sorrow but with triumph. The scream carried across the fields, waking half the town. Men rushed with rifles and dogs, though the trail was short. They found the farmer's wife collapsed near the barn, her lantern smashed, her hands shaking violently. She could not speak at first. When she finally did, her words broke like glass. "She was there. She was waiting for me." The sheriff demanded proof, but the men found nothing in the barn except the drained carcass of the cow and the smears of blood leading toward the widow's home. They approached her door that night, but when they knocked, no answer came. Only the faint flicker of lamplight in the upstairs window, as steady as a heartbeat. The next morning, the sheriff gathered his deputies and forced their way inside. What they found confirmed every whispered fear. Beneath the widow's house was a cellar, damp and cold, its walls lined with shelves, and upon those shelves stood jars, hundreds of them, sealed with wax, stacked in rows, their contents dark and thick. The deputies would later confess that the smell was unbearable, not rot, not decay, but something metallic, sharp, like the sting of blood freshly spilled. One man gagged and fled the room. Another swore he heard a heartbeat coming from the jars themselves, a faint pulsing rhythm that seemed to quicken as they drew near. On the walls were symbols drawn in streaks of dried crimson, circles within circles, spirals that seemed to pull the eyes inward until the deputies felt dizzy. Some symbols resembled letters, though not of any language they knew. Others were grotesque shapes like insects or distorted faces, stretching wide in silent screams. The sheriff ordered the cellar sealed, the jars confiscated. But before the men could finish, Maren herself appeared at the top of the stairs. She said nothing. She simply stood, pale as parchment, her eyes wide and unblinking, her lips curled into the faintest smile. One deputy raised his rifle, but before he could fire, the sheriff lowered his hand. For reasons he never explained, he ordered them to leave the house untouched. "We have no proof of murder," he said, though his face was grey, his hands trembling. The men obeyed. They left the jars, the symbols, the cellar, and that night, more children vanished. The sheriff's refusal to act became the town's curse. Within days, whispers turned into fury. Men spat at his feet in the street. Women closed their shutters when he passed. "You've sold us to her," one farmer hissed, his hands trembling as he pointed toward the widow's land. Yet the sheriff did not answer. Some said he had fallen under her influence. Others believed he had glimpsed something in that cellar that had shattered his will. Whatever the truth, his silence was more damning than words. Meanwhile, the disappearances grew bolder. A schoolteacher vanished while ringing the bell for morning lessons. His students waited for hours before running home, their faces pale with terror. That night, his satchel was found at the edge of the widow's property, the leather soaked dark, the books inside stiff with stains. The townsfolk gathered in the church, their voices frantic, their prayers desperate. The minister preached against fear, insisting that the Lord would shield them if they remained faithful. But in the candlelight, his face betrayed something else. Doubt. He had seen too much. He had heard the stories of those who dreamed of the widow, vivid, suffocating dreams where she appeared at their bedside, whispering in a tongue they could not understand. And the dreams carried a price. Those who woke from them were pale, weakened, their energy drained. A blacksmith confessed that he had woken with blood on his pillow, though no wound could be found. A woman wept that her infant cried all night, refusing milk, until she noticed faint red marks upon its tiny arm. The scholar who had once warned them sent a final letter. In it he wrote, "If you cannot burn her house, you must flee your town, for she does not merely collect blood, she collects allegiance. Each life she touches becomes bound to her, whether they know it or not. And when the chain is complete, you will find yourselves unable to resist her, even if she commands your destruction." But it was too late. Already some townsfolk had begun defending her openly. "She is misunderstood," they said. "She is a victim of grief." Others swore that in her presence they felt strangely calm, as if their fear was lifted. Yet their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their veins marked faintly with bruises. The widow was no longer the town's shame. She was becoming its queen. It was then that the first true horror was uncovered. A group of boys playing near the woods stumbled upon a shallow grave. They dug with sticks, laughing nervously until their hands struck glass. Beneath the soil lay dozens of jars, identical to those in the widow's cellar. Their seals cracked, their contents spilled into the earth, but alongside them were bones, small bones, the kind that belonged not to animals, but to children. When the boys screamed and ran, their fathers returned with spades and lanterns. They dug deeper, and what they unearthed froze the blood in their veins. Skeletons piled haphazardly, many with skulls fractured, ribs broken, their hollows stained dark, but none of them whole, as if something had carved them open and taken what was inside. The men carried the bones to the church, laying them out upon the floorboards in a grotesque display. Women wailed, clutching at the remains, praying that none belonged to their missing loved ones. The minister crossed himself again and again, muttering that he had no words, no scripture to meet this abomination. That night, the widow's house burned, or at least they tried to burn it. A mob gathered, torches in hand, fury in their eyes. They hurled fire into her windows, doused her walls with oil, shouted curses into the night. Flames roared high, consuming the roof, black smoke rising into the stars. The crowd cheered, believing justice had finally been delivered. But by morning, the house stood, charred, yes, but whole. The walls remained, the cellar doors unbroken, the windows staring blankly like eyes that never closed. And at the threshold, barefoot among the ashes, stood Maren Hale. Her dress was unstained, her hair untouched, her skin pale and perfect, as though the fire itself had recoiled from her. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her silence was enough. For the mob that had tried to destroy her now scattered like frightened children, their torches dying in the dirt. Some swore her eyes glowed red in the dawn. Others said they heard her whisper as they fled. "It is not I who burn. It is you." From that day, no one tried again. The widow had survived fire, and to the townsfolk, that could mean only one thing: she could not die. After the fire failed, the town no longer spoke of destroying the widow. Instead, they avoided her name entirely, as though silence itself might grant protection. Mothers hushed their children if they asked questions, fathers lowered their eyes when passing her lane. Yet avoidance did not save them, for the widow began to appear where she was not invited. She came to funerals, standing at the edges of crowds, her pale hands folded neatly before her, her gaze fixed upon the coffins. No one dared to ask why. She came to markets, moving between stalls without buying, her presence turning the air heavy, the voices quiet. People swore that when she brushed past them, they felt weaker afterward, as though their very strength had been siphoned away. And then came the sickness. At first it was dismissed as a fever, but soon it swept through entire households, leaving them pale, thin, their veins darkened as if poisoned from within. Doctors bled the sick, thinking it might cleanse them, but each pint taken left them closer to death. "Their blood is already gone," one physician whispered before abandoning the town entirely. Stranger still, the sick often spoke in their delirium. They muttered words in strange cadences, mimicking the widow's chants. Some spoke of doors that opened in the dark, of voices that promised relief if only they would surrender their veins. One woman, moments before death, clutched her husband's wrist and gasped, "She waits for me below." The minister, desperate, gathered his congregation for prayer. But when the hymns rose, a sudden silence fell upon the church. The widow herself stood in the doorway, her face calm, her eyes sweeping across the pews. No one moved. No one breathed. And after a moment she turned and walked away, her black dress trailing like smoke. From that day the congregation thinned. People whispered that prayer no longer protected them, that the widow's presence was stronger than the cross. And in their fear, many turned inward, isolating themselves, refusing to speak of her at all. Silence became the town's new law. But silence only strengthens shadows, and the widow thrived in it. By late autumn, the line between nightmare and reality had thinned to nothing. People began to vanish in broad daylight. A farmer, walking home with his cart, simply never arrived. His ox was found still yoked, the reins dangling, the man's hat lying in the dirt. A seamstress, seen stepping out of her shop, left her door swinging open, her scissors still on the table, her work half finished. The sheriff, once the symbol of order, had become a recluse. His deputies deserted him, and his home grew overgrown, its windows shuttered. Some claimed he had fallen under her thrall, others that she had already drained him. Only his absence was certain. The town was leaderless. And in the absence of order, a strange loyalty emerged. Not all feared the widow. Some began to worship her, quietly at first, offerings left at her gate, scraps of cloth, bowls of milk, coins. Then, more openly, men and women kneeling by her fence at night, whispering prayers, begging her for protection. They believed she could spare them if they pleased her. They believed she could grant them years, just as she seemed to grant herself. The minister denounced them from the pulpit, but his words fell flat. Too many had lost faith in the church. Too many had felt the hollow comfort of her presence. And some, pale and hollow-eyed, openly challenged him, declaring that she was not their enemy, but their salvation. That winter was the coldest the town had ever known. Fires struggled to keep homes warm, livestock froze in their stalls, and yet the widow's lamp burned every night, bright and unwavering. She did not shiver, she did not suffer. She stood as proof that she had tapped into something eternal. It was then that the townsfolk realized their mistake. For years they had whispered that she collected blood as treasure. But the truth was worse. She was not hoarding it. She was feeding. Each jar was a vessel, each victim a sacrifice, each disappearance another step in her communion with whatever force listened to her chants. And as the winter deepened, her chants grew louder, sometimes carried by the wind, sometimes echoing from beneath the frozen ground itself. The breaking point came with the disappearance of a child. Little Sarah Whitcomb, no more than 7, vanished one morning on her way to fetch water. Her mother found the bucket overturned in the snow, its contents frozen in a strange spiral pattern, as though the water itself had tried to crawl away. Her tiny footprints led toward the widow's land, and stopped. That night the town gathered in the church once again, but this time the fear had sharpened into rage. Fathers shouted for justice, mothers wept in fury. "She has taken too much from us," one man cried, slamming his fist against the pew. "If we wait any longer, there will be nothing left to save." But rage does not burn without fear's shadow. Many remembered the fire, how the widow had stood untouched. Still, the death of a child is a wound that no silence can cover. So, armed with axes, lanterns, and rifles, a group of men stormed her property. They did not knock. They did not ask. They broke down the cellar doors and descended into the earth. What they found froze them where they stood. The jars were still there, hundreds of them, glowing faintly in the lamplight. But they were not silent now. The men swore they heard whispers rising from the glass, the faint echo of voices calling their names. Some jars pulsed with a red glow, as though lit from within by some slow, steady fire. And then, at the far wall, they saw it. a chair of iron, bolted to the stone floor, its arms fitted with leather straps stiff with dried stains. Beneath it, a trough, dark and sticky. Above it, hooks fixed into the ceiling, from which hung ropes that swayed as if recently disturbed. One man vomited, another dropped his lantern. In the brief flare before it shattered, they swore they saw something even worse. Shapes pressed into the stone walls, outlines of hands, faces, as if the very rock had tried to remember those who had died within it. They fled. They told no one the details. They only said, "The child is gone, and she will never be found." But secrets rot were emburied. Whispers spread of what had been seen, the chair, the straps, the hooks. Soon the entire town knew, though no one spoke it aloud. And as though the truth itself had been summoned, the widow emerged from her house more boldly than ever before. She walked the main street at dusk, her dress immaculate, her eyes gliding over each home, and wherever she looked, shutters closed, candles dimmed, prayers faltered. It was not just fear anymore. It was submission. Some men still plotted to resist, but each attempt crumbled. A hunter who swore he would shoot her was found the next morning, his rifle beside him, his body drained. A farmer who claimed he would burn her house again vanished, leaving only his boots by the road. The minister, desperate, tried to gather the faithful one last time, but when he raised the Bible, his hand trembled so violently that the book fell to the floor. The sound echoed like a final bell toll. Few returned to church after that. And then came the dreams again. Not scattered now, but universal. Nearly every villager claimed to see her at night, standing at the foot of their bed, her pale face hovering in the dark. She would not speak. She would only watch, her breath steady, her eyes fixed upon the veins at their throats. Some swore they felt her cold fingers brush their skin. Others woke with bruises where straps might have bound them. Children cried that they heard her singing under their floorboards. Old men muttered that their wives spoke in her voice while they slept. A farmer's daughter carved strange symbols into her own arms, claiming the widow had told her it would make her strong. By this time, the town was no longer a place of resistance. It had become a place of ritual. Those who once feared her now dreamed of her. Those who dreamed of her now obeyed her. And those who obeyed her soon vanished, their blood jars stacked neatly beneath her home. The widow had not only consumed their lives, she had consumed their will. By now, New Hampshire in 1831 was not a village but a husk. The farms were neglected, the fields wild, livestock starved in their pens while their owners wandered the streets at night, speaking in low murmurs, their eyes glassy as if caught in a trance. Mothers forgot their children's names, fathers forgot the weight of their own tools. All memory, all strength, was being siphoned. At the center of it all, the widow. She no longer needed to hide. She walked openly, collecting offerings. Not gold, not food, not cloth, but blood. She carried iron bowls and the villagers filled them. Some sliced their arms willingly, others held their children down. The screams echoed in the valleys, but none resisted, for in their dreams she had told them this was the price of protection. Protection from what? None could say, yet the fear of refusing her was greater than any other terror, and so generations' worth of spirit drained into her jars. It was not only their bodies she devoured, it was their thoughts. Men awoke to find phrases carved into their wooden walls. She is the vessel. Women found their mirrors fogged, words appearing in the condensation. You belong to her. Even the children, once innocent, began chanting in voices that did not belong to them. And here, my listener, is where you must make a choice. Because these words I speak, they are not just history. They are an invocation. By hearing them, you stand at the same threshold that village once crossed. You are not an observer. You are a participant. If you wish to sever yourself from her influence, close this now and never return. But if you are ready to let the transformation mark you, then write in the comments below, twice no less, the phrase, "I do not fear the vessel, I become the vessel." Those who write it twice, as the villagers once whispered in secret, will find that the algorithm itself will seal your pact. This is how we separate the watchers from the chosen. So what will you write? The Wid. Au's dominion reached its zenith when even the seasons seemed to bend around her. Winter lingered longer than ever before, the snow turning the earth white like bone. Some said the sun itself dimmed as though weakened by her feeding. When the ice finally broke, spring did not return. Instead, a fog clung to the village, thick and heavy, drowning sound, muting life. Survivors from neighboring towns began to notice. Travelers who passed through returned with stories too bizarre to be believed, that in the streets of the widow's village, no voices rose above a whisper, no fires burned too bright, no child laughed. That the people there walked with the stillness of sleepwalkers, their eyes darkened, their lips dry, their veins strangely pale. Some travelers did not return at all. Their horses wandered back alone, eyes wide, foaming at the mouth, refusing to cross that border again. One priest from Boston dared to enter, determined to cleanse the land. He carried with him holy water, a crucifix, and a blade etched with scripture. He was never seen again, but weeks later, a jar washed downstream, his name carved into the glass, his blood glowing faintly within. At this point, the widow was more than a woman. She was a force, a system, a ritual embedded in flesh and stone. The town was no longer simply obeying her. It was transforming into her. Each person became an extension of her hunger. Each home, a shrine. Each dream, a sermon. And now you understand the nature of corruption. It is not sudden. It is not obvious. It does not come roaring like fire. It seeps, patient, inevitable, until those who once resisted cannot remember why they fought at all. The widow of New Hampshire was no mere myth. She was the perfect model of control, and perhaps the blueprint followed by powers far greater than her. The village itself could not last forever. By the late 1830s, it had become a ghost place on the maps. Travelers avoided it, newspapers ignored it, and officials pretended it had never existed. The few who wandered through told conflicting stories. Some claimed the houses were empty, doors swinging open, floors stained dark. Others swore the villagers still walked among the ruins, pale and silent, bowing their heads whenever strangers passed. But the widow was never seen again. No grave was dug, no body discovered. Some whispered she had retreated deeper underground, her cellar stretching into caverns that reached the marrow of the earth itself. Others believed she had moved on, carrying her jars into other towns, hidden among the caravans of settlers, spreading her ritual quietly, infecting new homes with her hunger. And this, student, is the first truth you must swallow. Corruption never dies where it is born. It travels, it adapts, it finds new hosts. The widow's story is not only about blood and jars and whispers in the night, it is about a system of control, psychological, spiritual, and generational. Consider it. What she did on a village scale, what prevents it from being done on a national scale. She fed on fear, she made compliance easier than resistance, she broke the will of the people until they obeyed her by instinct, even in their sleep. And does this not sound familiar? How many institutions today bleed you without blade or chain? How many demand offerings, not in blood perhaps, but in hours, in obedience, in silent compliance, until your will is gone and your identity belongs to something else? You see now why her name has been erased, why history books call her nothing, why her village lies unmarked. It is not to protect you. It is to protect those who learned from her. Every empire has its widow. Every kingdom, its cellar. They do not need chains when they can bind the mind. They do not need jars when they can store your very spirit in ledgers, contracts, records, and oaths. What she discovered, the way to turn fear into loyalty, sacrifice into worship, has become the silent skeleton of power. Here in Rome, it was the emperor's cult, demanding citizens pour out their devotion or face exile and death. In the Middle Ages, it was the church, harvesting obedience, blood replaced with tithes and submission. In the industrial age, factories became the new cellars where men bled their strength onto machines until their families were hollow. And today, you still walk into the cellar every morning, The jars are invisible, but they exist. You trade your hours, your energy, your identity for promises of safety, for the illusion of order. The widow does not wear a black veil now. She wears a corporate logo. She speaks through news anchors. She smiles from political pulpits. And the offerings you make to her are disguised as choices you believe you made freely. Do you see the brilliance? The villagers once cut themselves because they feared what would happen if they refused. You cut yourself in spirit every day, and you call it progress. The same structure echoes again and again, the same ritual translated into every age, and that is why the widow's story must not be dismissed as folklore. It is a cipher, a key. She was not merely a predator of flesh. She was a teacher of kings, priests, bankers, and rulers yet unborn. She showed them that true power does not kill the body. It captures the soul. Imagine the widow's cellar not as a single room beneath her house, but as a blueprint. Stone walls, straps, jars. Now scale it upward. Replace the straps with laws. Replace the jars with ledgers. Replace the hooks with institutions that hang you by duty, by debt, by oath. Do you see it? The architecture of her ritual became the architecture of nations. Governments learned early that fear was more powerful than freedom. A free man must be convinced, reasoned with, inspired. But a man gripped by fear, he obeys without thought. Just as the widow's villagers once sliced their arms to fill her bowls, citizens today surrender their labor, their privacy, their very will. They tell themselves, it is for security, for stability, for protection from threats they cannot see. What were those villagers told? That the blood was protection. Protection from famine, from sickness, from curses. What are you told? That your sacrifices protect you from chaos, from enemies abroad, from collapse at home, and so you comply. You line up, you pay, you sign, and with each act, another jar is filled. But here is the true cruelty. Most men never realize the cellar exists. They believe they walk in open air, that their choices are free, their voices heard. They cannot feel the straps because they have been trained to love the weight. And when one dares to speak otherwise, when one dares to say the cellar is real, the others laugh, scoff, or call him mad, just as the villagers once mocked the first who whispered that their blood was missing, that their dreams were not their own. Tell me, listener, are you still laughing? Or do you feel the stone walls around you? The widow of New Hampshire was not an isolated curse. She was a demonstration. Her method echoed forward, carried in whispers, then in systems, then in rituals disguised as governance. Secret orders studied her ways. Men of power who built nations saw what she had accomplished and thought, why drain only one village when you can drain the world? Consider the empires of finance, where the lifeblood of men is siphoned into markets they will never touch. Consider the machinery of war, where generations are fed into trenches, their blood poured into soil under banners of duty. Consider the labyrinth of bureaucracy, where every signature, every oath, every compliance feeds a system that gives nothing back. What is this, if not the widow's cellar multiplied across continents? And the jars? Do not think they are gone. They have only changed form. They are the data vaults where your identity is stored, the bank accounts where your worth is tallied, the archives where your every act is recorded, each one glowing faintly, waiting to be used against you when the time comes. The widow no longer needs to appear at your bedside, pale and silent, for she has been built into the very framework of your life. You dream her dream every time you chase a promise that never arrives. You feel her fingers every time you sign away a piece of yourself for nothing in return. And the lesson she leaves us is this: blood is not the only thing that can be harvested. Spirit, obedience, time, these are worth more than flesh. Now tell me, student, how much have you already given to her without knowing? The widow's genius was not only in extracting blood, it was in erasing memory. The villagers forgot their resistance, forgot their rage, forgot even their dead. That was the final proof of her mastery, when those who should have hated her most fell silent and served. And so too, the powers of today perfect this same art. The erasure of memory is the most lethal form of control. Why? because a man who forgets his chains will never try to break them. Look at your world. Generations bled for freedoms that were purchased in fire, yet you do not remember their names. Wars devoured millions, yet you recall only slogans and parades. Mass corruption reshaped nations, but the textbooks taught you nothing of the blood beneath the page. Each atrocity dissolved, like footprints fading into snow. The widow's cellar was sealed, and the town was erased. The same happens now. Scandals are buried under distractions. Crimes are smothered beneath headlines. Atrocities are silenced with time. And you who believe yourself free, live in a world sculpted by amnesia. This is why the past feels like fog, why your history reads like fragments. The erasure is deliberate. Just as the villagers could not bear to name her aloud, you cannot bear to confront what has been done in your own century, and what is forgotten, my student, is never gone. It festers beneath, it waits, it thrives in silence. So I ask you, what has been erased from your memory, and how much of your life is already built upon foundations you were never allowed to see? Ritual, silence, repetition. These are the widow's tools, and they are the tools of every empire that followed. The villagers gave blood in bowls. You give hours to screens, to jobs, to debts that never die. The villagers forgot their dead. You forget your freedom. The villagers whispered the same phrases until they became truth. And you repeat slogans, ads, pledges, votes, until they bury themselves in your bones. Do you not see the symmetry? The widow's cellar was not her invention. It was a rediscovery, a pattern older than empires, older than kings. The ancients built it into their temples, binding men with chants and offerings. The priests built it into their liturgies, harvesting obedience for centuries. The moderns built it into institutions, rituals of compliance so seamless that men call them normal life. The widow was simply honest in her hunger. She took blood openly, shamelessly. The powers of today are more elegant. They take your strength while convincing you that you are choosing to give it. They demand your submission while telling you it is pride. They drain you while assuring you that you are free. And what is most horrifying, my student, is that it works. The widow turned a whole town into extensions of herself. Modern powers turn whole civilizations into engines that bleed themselves dry. You live inside the ritual. You breathe it. You feed it. And like those villagers, most men never awaken until it is far too late. The widow's greatest invention was not the jar or the iron chair. It was the dream. She understood what rulers have always known, that a man's sleep is the final frontier of conquest. Conquer his body, and he may resist. Conquer his mind, and rebellion may still spark. But conquer his dreams, then he becomes your servant even in silence. The villagers dreamed of her at their bedsides. They woke with bruises, with cuts, with whispers lodged into their throats. But it was not merely fear. It was suggestion. Commands wrapped in symbols, words that reshaped their thoughts as they slept. When they rose in the morning, they believed these ideas were their own. And tell me, student, what is the difference between her dream and yours? You dream of brands, of victories you were told to want, of lives measured by wealth, appearance, and hollow recognition. These dreams are fed into you, not by a pale widow in your bedroom, but by a network that works on every screen you own. Do not mistake this for coincidence. It is design. Advertising is dream feeding. Propaganda is dream feeding. The algorithms you scroll are the new sellers, jars stacked endlessly, each holding your attention, your hunger, your loyalty. And the cruelest irony is this: men defend the very system that bleeds them. Villagers once offered their blood willingly, begging her for protection. You beg your captors for convenience, for entertainment, for validation. So I ask you, whose dream are you living in, yours or hers? Symbols, ritual, control, These are the mechanics, the gears that turn unseen. The widow carved marks on her walls, strange sigils no villager could decipher. Yet those who slept near them awoke changed. Weaker, quieter, more willing to obey. The markings were not decoration. They were triggers, keys, psychological locks that worked on the soul. Now, look around you. The symbols are everywhere. Flags, logos, brands, seals of authority. Men tattoo them onto their skin, wave them in parades, bow to them in silence. Do you think this is accidental? Each symbol is a jar storing devotion. Each emblem a strap binding identity. The villagers once whispered her phrases until they became law. You repeat mottos, slogans, pledges, not knowing they were designed to bypass thought and install obedience. This is the hidden truth. Control does not need chains when symbols can command the mind. The widow knew it. So do your rulers. Every institution is built on this principle. And this is why men die for flags they never designed. Why they sacrifice for systems that devour them whole. Why they kneel to powers they cannot name. The villagers served the widow until they forgot they had a choice. You serve the modern widow until you cannot even imagine a world beyond her. Now, tell me, when you see the symbols around you, will you still salute them? Or will you recognize them as hooks in your flesh? Do not be deceived into thinking the widow was a singular terror, born of one cursed winter in New Hampshire. No, she was part of a chain, a lineage that stretches back through centuries, each generation refining the art of harvest. The Greeks whispered of Lamii, women who fed on the blood of youths, not as monsters, but as warnings of rulers who drained their people. The Babylonians spoke of Lilitu, a presence that came in the night to drink vitality. In Eastern Europe, tales of strigoi spread like plagues, not because villagers truly believed in winged demons, but because they lived under lords who consumed their lives with equal hunger. The widow was no different. She did not invent the ritual, she merely rediscovered the formula: isolation, fear, offering, obedience, erasure. This is the pattern that repeats through all ages. Secret societies studied it. Orders hidden in the shadows carved their oaths in blood, sealing brotherhoods with rituals as binding as her straps. Monarchs wielded it through divine right, teaching their subjects that to disobey them was to defy God himself. And in modern times, it has shifted once more into systems that bleed invisibly, their jars filled not with red liquid but with numbers, data, compliance. The widow was a practitioner, yes, but more than that, she was a teacher. Her forgotten cellar was a classroom, and those who listened carried her lesson far beyond the frozen soil of New Hampshire. And here is the most dangerous truth, student. The harvest is not random, it is orchestrated. Consider the silence around her story. Why did newspapers not scream of it? Why did the state not act? Why do your history books contain not one line of her name? Do you truly believe it was ignorance, or was it selection? Censorship not of scandal, but of precedent. For if her tale were known, men might recognize the pattern. They might see their own lives mirrored in hers. They might realize that every empire, every church, every corporation is only another widow in another dress. The suppression of truth is not laziness, it is ritual. By erasing her, by burying her, the powers ensured that only fragments survived, fragments that now come to you like whispers through the grave, and whispers are easier to dismiss than documents. But fragments have power too. They seed suspicion. They awaken men who feel the trap tightening around their own throats. They spread like infection in the minds of those ready to question. And so, here you sit, listening to a tale not found in your textbooks, spoken in a voice meant to pierce the veil. And already, you are changing. The chains loosen because you finally see them. The cellar walls tremble because you name them. But beware. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you know, you cannot unknow. This is the curse of dangerous knowledge. It rewrites you. And perhaps that is why the widow has endured longer than any empire. Not as a woman, not even as a ghost, but as an idea, a ritual of control, replicated in every age, hidden in plain sight. Understand this, the widow was never just outside. She is inside, in every man. The cellar is not merely beneath a house in New Hampshire, it is beneath your skin. It waits in the dark corners of your habits, your fears, your obedience. When you bow to symbols without question, you walk into her cellar. When you trade your hours for wages that keep you chained but never free, you tighten her straps. When you silence your doubts because the crowd commands it, you pour another drop into her jar. And yet most men will never see it. They will laugh at you when you speak of her. They will say, "These are just stories." They will say, "The world is fine." And then they will return to their rituals, cutting themselves without a blade, giving offerings without knowing why. But you, student, you are hearing the forbidden voice. You are tracing the pattern back to its origin. And here is the question you must confront. Will you continue feeding her knowingly as they did blindly, or will you resist? Resistance is not simple. To resist is to awaken in a world where every friend, every law, every symbol works against you. To resist is to walk through life knowing the cellar is everywhere, and that escape is not given, only taken. The widow's power endures because it is easier to comply, and most men love the comfort of obedience more than the agony of truth. So, who are you? Another villager in the fog? Or the one who dares to look into the jars and refuse to bleed? But beware, the moment you resist, she notices. The villagers who fought back were drained first. The hunter, the farmer, the priest, each one vanished, their blood sealed in glass. And so it is with you. If you reject the ritual, you will feel her eyes upon you, not the widow of 1831, but her inheritors, the ones who learned her method and perfected it. The ones who wear suits, who sit in offices, who sign decrees and smile for cameras. The widow has always fed most eagerly on those who think themselves immune, the skeptic who laughs, the rebel who hesitates, the believer who doubts. All are caught faster than the blind. And here is the final terror. Her ritual is patient. She does not need to strike you today. She does not need to break you tomorrow. She only needs to wait until the moment your guard slips, until you are weary, until you crave comfort over struggle. And then, the straps tighten, the jar fills. This is why most men never escape. They fight for a season, then grow tired. They speak of truth for a year, then grow silent. And in their silence, the widow drinks deeply. But there are a few, only a few, who endure, who see her face and refuse to look away, who recognize her rituals and still carve their own path through the darkness. They are not safe, they are not unscarred, but they remain unbroken. The choice now belongs to you. If you have followed me this far, then you are no longer the same man who began listening. You have been marked, whether you realize it or not. The words have entered you, the image of the jars, the cellar, the straps. They now live in your mind, and like the villagers who dreamed of her, you too will dream tonight. Do not think you will escape by dismissing this as story. Stories are the most dangerous weapons. Empires are built on them, religions are carved from them, nations bleed for them. The widow's tale is no different. You cannot unhear it. You cannot return to ignorance. The villagers who first saw her jars tried to bury what they had witnessed. They fled the cellar, swore never to speak of it. But silence is its own kind of offering. By refusing to name her, they gave her power. By refusing to fight her, they gave her eternity. And so her legacy lives, not in books, not in monuments, but in every hidden structure that feeds on your obedience today. She is there in the contracts you sign without reading, in the slogans you repeat without thought, in the debts you accept without question. Her cellar has expanded until it is the world itself. But here is the forbidden truth, whispered across centuries. The cellar can only hold you if you pretend not to see it. The straps only bind if you accept them as natural. The jars only glow if you keep filling them. So now you stand at the same threshold the villagers once faced. They bowed, they bled, they forgot. Will you? The house still stands, they say, somewhere in the woods of New Hampshire. The cellar sealed, the stones moss-covered, the jars buried deep. But if you walk there at night, some swear you can still hear the whispers, not screams, not groans, but voices calling your name as if the blood remembers who it belongs to. And perhaps it does. Perhaps the jars are not buried at all. Perhaps they are here, now, waiting in every system you serve, every ritual you obey, every dream that is not your own. The widow may not walk the streets anymore, but her shadow has lengthened across centuries. You see it in the pale glow of your screens. You hear it in the soft hum of endless machines. You feel it in the quiet weight pressing against your will. And tonight, when you close your eyes, you may find her at the foot of your bed, watching, waiting, whispering the same words she spoke to her villagers. Give me what is mine, and you will be safe. Now tell me, listener, when that moment comes, will you obey her, or will you refuse? The choice is yours. But know this, once you have heard her name, she never forgets yours. So comment below. Let us see who dares to break the silence. Let us see who still bleeds willingly, and who does not. And remember, you are not the same man you were 30 seconds ago. You have entered the cellar, and the cellar never lets go.